Braden Rourke had never imagined that crossing a threshold into the Border Patrol station would feel like walking into his own execution. But the stares from the assembled rangers made his stomach knot with a familiar dread that reminded him too much of battlefields he had tried to forget. The captain, a grizzled man with a scar bisecting his left eyebrow, gestured impatiently toward the corner where a figure stood apart from the others, arms crossed and posture rigid in a way that spoke of someone accustomed to being unwelcome. She was an orc, easily 6 feet tall with shoulders broader than most men Braden had served alongside, her green skin catching the lamplight in a way that made her seem almost luminous against the rough timber walls. Small tusks curved upward from her lower jaw, and her dark eyes swept over him with an assessment that felt more thorough than any commander's inspection. "This is Grusha," the captain said without preamble, his tone making it clear he expected neither conversation nor complaint. "You two will be partners for the northern stretch. Orders came down from command. We need mixed patrols to improve relations with the settlements near the Orcish territories." Braden forced himself not to react, though his mind churned with questions he knew better than to voice. He had seen orcs before, of course, during the skirmishes along the Eastern Front 3 years ago, but those encounters had been brief and violent, nothing like standing in a cramped room with one who was supposedly his ally. Grusha said nothing, her expression giving away nothing beyond a slight tightening around her eyes that might have been irritation or might have been resignation. "You leave at dawn," the captain continued, already turning away as if the matter were settled and required no further discussion. "Check in weekly at the halfway station. Watch for smugglers, raiders, and anything unusual from across the border. Standard patrol protocols." The other rangers had already begun filtering out, their whispers not quite soft enough to miss entirely. Braden caught fragments about monsters and death wishes and someone's cousin who had disappeared near Orc lands. He squared his shoulders and crossed the room toward Grusha, who watched his approach with the stillness of a predator deciding whether something was threat or prey. "I suppose we should discuss logistics," Braden offered, keeping his voice neutral and professional. Up close, he could see the fine details that made her distinctly not human. The slightly elongated canines, the pointed tips of her ears just visible through her dark braided hair, the way her muscles moved beneath her skin with a different sort of efficiency. She wore the standard ranger leathers, but they had been modified to accommodate her broader frame. "Logistics," she repeated, and her voice was deeper than he expected, with a resonant quality that seemed to vibrate in his chest. "You mean how we will avoid getting each other killed while command uses us to prove some political point?" Her bluntness startled him into something close to a smile. "That would be part of it, yes." Grusha uncrossed her arms, and Braden noticed the bow slung across her back, a weapon that would have required 2 hands for most men but seemed proportional on her frame. "I do not need a human partner. I have patrolled these lands for 2 years without incident. But I follow orders, even stupid ones." "Makes 2 of us," Braden said, and this time he did smile, though it felt rusty on his face. "I am Braden Rourke. I signed on 3 months ago after my discharge from the Eastern companies." Something flickered in her expression at that, too quick to read. "You fought in the border wars." It was not a question, but Braden answered anyway. "I did. I am not proud of everything that happened there, but I cannot change the past." Grusha studied him for a long moment, and Braden had the uncomfortable sensation of being weighed and measured against some standard he could not identify. Finally, she gave a single nod. "I will meet you at the north gate at dawn. Bring your own supplies. I do not share food." She moved past him with surprising grace for someone her size. and Braden was left alone in the empty station with the lingering sense that he had just agreed to something far more complicated than a simple patrol assignment. The night passed restlessly in his small rented room above the tavern, his mind circling through scenarios and strategies like he was planning for combat instead of a routine border patrol. By the time gray light began filtering through the grimy window, Braden had convinced himself that professionalism and distance would see them through this assignment without incident. They would do their jobs, file their reports, and eventually command would realize that forcing interspecies partnerships was more trouble than it was worth. The north gate stood at the edge of the settlement, a simple timber structure that marked where civilization gave way to the wild frontier. Grusha was already waiting, a heavy pack at her feet and her bow in hand. She had added a fur-lined cloak against the morning chill, and Braden noticed the careful way she had positioned herself in the shadows, as if accustomed to making herself less visible. "You are punctual," she observed as he approached. "That is something." "My sergeant beat punctuality into me pretty thoroughly," Braden replied, adjusting his own pack. He had brought standard ranger supplies: bedroll, rations for 2 weeks, basic medical kit, rope, and his short sword. His bow was not as impressive as Grusha's, but it had served him well enough. Grusha picked up her pack with ease and started north without waiting for agreement. Braden fell into step beside her, though her longer stride meant he had to push his pace slightly to keep up. The path led through scrub forest that gradually thickened as they moved away from the settlement, the sounds of human habitation fading into the ambient noise of wilderness. They walked in silence for the first hour, each seemingly content to maintain their own thoughts. The morning warmed slowly, and Braden found his attention drawn to the way Grusha moved through the landscape with an economy of motion that spoke of someone who had spent years in these woods. She stepped over roots without looking down, ducked branches that would have caught him squarely in the face, and paused occasionally to scan their surroundings with a focus that made him feel clumsy in comparison. "You have not asked the usual questions," Grusha said suddenly, not looking at him. "What questions would those be? Whether I eat human flesh, whether I can be trusted, whether I will murder you in your sleep and sell your belongings to smugglers." Her tone was flat, reciting a list she had clearly heard before. Braden considered his response carefully. "I figured if command paired us, they must have some confidence in your reliability. As for the rest, judging someone based on what they might do seems less useful than judging them on what they actually do." Grusha's head turned slightly toward him, though she did not break stride. "You are either very naive or very strange for a human soldier." "Probably both," Braden admitted. "The Eastern Front taught me that most of what I thought I knew about enemies was propaganda designed to make killing easier. I am trying not to make the same mistakes here." She said nothing to that, but the quality of her silence felt different, less hostile and more thoughtful. They continued north through the changing landscape, following a trail that wound through dense stands of pine and across streams still cold with snowmelt from the distant mountains. Braden's legs burned from the pace, but he refused to ask for a rest, some stubborn pride demanding he prove he could keep up. It was midday when Grusha finally called a halt near a small clearing where a creek burbled over smooth stones. She dropped her pack and moved to the water's edge, kneeling to refill her waterskin with practiced efficiency. Braden did the same, grateful for the break even if he would not admit it. "We will reach the first way station by nightfall if we maintain this pace," Grusha said, digging into her pack for what looked like dried meat wrapped in leaves. "Tomorrow we start the actual patrol route. The territory runs for 3 days north to south, following the border ridge." Braden pulled out his own rations, hardtack and cheese that seemed unappetizing compared to whatever Grusha was eating, which smelled of smoke and unfamiliar spices. What are we most likely to encounter? Smugglers, mostly. Humans trying to avoid tariffs on goods from the orcish holds. Sometimes hunting parties that cross the boundary without permission. Occasionally deserters looking to disappear into the wilderness. She paused, tearing into her food with those sharp teeth. Raiders are rare but dangerous. Mixed groups, usually. Outcasts from both our peoples who have decided cooperation is more profitable than isolation. Has there been recent activity? Grusha shook her head. Not for 6 weeks, but spring brings people out of winter quarters. We will likely see an increase. They ate in relative quiet, the sound of the creek providing a pleasant backdrop. Braden found himself watching Grusha when he thought she was not paying attention, trying to reconcile the person before him with the stories he had heard. She moved with confidence but not aggression, and there was an intelligence in her eyes that gave lie to any notion of orcs as mindless savages. When she caught him staring, he had the grace to look embarrassed. "Sorry," he muttered. "I have not spent much time around orcs outside of combat situations. Still adjusting." "At least you admit it instead of pretending not to stare," Grusha said. There might have been the faintest hint of amusement in her voice. "I also have not spent much time with humans who were not trying to kill me or drive me off. This arrangement is strange for both of us." "Why did you join the border patrol?" Braden asked, curiosity overcoming his hesitation. Grusha was quiet for long enough that he thought she might not answer. When she did speak, her words came slowly, as if she was deciding how much to reveal. "My clan was destroyed during the border wars, caught between human forces and rival orc holds who saw any sign of weakness as opportunity. I was 14 and away on a hunt when it happened. By the time I returned, there was nothing left but ashes and bodies." The stark simplicity of her words hit Braden harder than any elaborate tale might have. "I am sorry." "I do not need your pity," Grusha said sharply, then seemed to catch herself. "But I suppose you understand loss if you fought in those same wars." Braden nodded slowly. "Different circumstances, but yes, I lost friends. I did things I wish I could undo. When my enlistment ended, I wanted to find somewhere I could actually help instead of just destroy." "And they sent you to babysit an orc," Grusha said with something that might have been dark humor. "They sent me to work with a ranger who knows this territory better than I ever will," Braden corrected. "There is a difference." Grusha met his eyes for a long moment, and something in her expression shifted fractionally. Not quite trust, but perhaps a willingness to consider the possibility of it. "We should continue. The way station is still several hours away, and I do not want to arrive after dark." The afternoon passed in more companionable silence than the morning had. Braden found himself settling into the rhythm of the patrol, his body remembering the cadence of long marches, even as his attention stayed alert for any signs of danger. Grusha set a punishing pace, but she also demonstrated an awareness of the terrain that saved them time and effort, choosing paths that were easier to traverse and pausing at vantage points to scan for threats. The way station appeared as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, a sturdy log structure built into the side of a low hill with a clear view of the surrounding area. Smoke rose from the chimney, indicating they were not the first to arrive. Grusha's posture shifted subtly, her hand drifting toward her bow, and Braden took her cue to approach cautiously. The door opened before they reached it, revealing an older human man with gray threading through his dark hair and the weathered appearance of someone who had spent decades on the frontier. His eyes widened slightly at the sight of Grusha, but he recovered quickly and offered a nod of greeting. "Rangers," he said simply. "Come in. I have stew on the fire and space by the hearth." "Thank you," Braden replied, letting Grusha enter first. The interior was simple but well-maintained, with sleeping platforms along one wall and a central fire pit that radiated welcome heat. Two other rangers were already there, both human, and their reactions to Grusha were less welcoming than the station keepers had been. One, a young man who could not have been more than 20, actually moved his hand to his knife before the older ranger grabbed his wrist and shook his head in warning. "Mixed patrol," the station keeper explained unnecessarily. "Command's new initiative. You two will be seeing more of these partnerships." "Wonderful," the older ranger muttered, though he at least had the decency to look uncomfortable with his own reaction. "I am Derek. This fool is my partner, Will. We have been patrolling the southern stretch. Braden Rourke. This is Grusha." Braden made a point of keeping his tone casual, as if there were nothing unusual about the situation. "We are taking the northern route." Grusha said nothing, moving to stake out a sleeping platform on the far side of the room, as distant from the others as the space allowed. Braden felt torn between joining the other humans and making a statement by staying near his partner, but Grusha solved the problem by shooting him a look that clearly said she preferred the distance. He settled near the fire instead, accepting a bowl of stew from the station keeper with gratitude. Dinner was awkward, filled with stilted conversation that carefully avoided mentioning the obvious tension. Derek and Will traded gossip about smugglers they had encountered and settlements they had passed through, while the station keeper shared news from the southern forts. Braden contributed when spoken to, but found his attention drifting to Grusha, who ate her own meal in isolated silence, her expression unreadable. When the others began preparing for sleep, Braden took his bowl to the wash basin and found himself standing near where Grusha sat sharpening her knife with long, practiced strokes. "Tomorrow will be easier," he offered quietly, "once we are back on patrol without an audience." Grusha did not look up from her work. "You do not have to do this." "Do what? Pretend you are comfortable? Defend me to other humans? It will make things harder for you." Braden considered that, then shook his head. "I am not pretending anything. And if other people have a problem with you, that seems like their issue to resolve, not mine." "You are naive," Grusha said, but there was less bite in it than before. "So you keep telling me," Braden replied with a slight smile. "Get some rest. I have a feeling tomorrow will be a long day." He moved to his own sleeping platform, aware of the watching eyes of the other rangers and the weight of choices that seemed far more significant than they should. As he drifted toward sleep, his last conscious thought was that he had somehow managed to make this assignment more complicated in a single day, and they had not even started the real work yet. Dawn brought cold rain that turned the trail muddy and miserable. Braden and Grusha left the way station before the others woke, both seemingly eager to avoid another awkward meal. They moved north into territory that grew progressively wilder, the trees thicker and the undergrowth denser, until the trail became little more than a suggestion worn into the landscape by previous patrols. Grusha led without comment, her focus entirely on the route ahead. Braden followed, trusting her knowledge of the terrain even as the rain soaked through his supposedly waterproof cloak and made every step a battle against slippery mud. By mid-morning, they were both thoroughly miserable, though Grusha gave no sign of wanting to stop. "Is the entire patrol area this cheerful?" Braden asked, wiping water from his eyes for the 100th time. "Only in spring," Grusha replied. "In summer it is unbearably hot. In autumn the wind will freeze you. In winter the snow makes travel impossible for weeks at a time." "You make it sound so appealing." Was that almost a smile pulling at Grusha's tusks? "You asked to work the frontier. This is what the frontier looks like. They pushed on through the rain until early afternoon, when Grusha finally called a halt beneath an overhang of rock that provided minimal shelter, but was better than nothing. They huddled against the stone, not quite touching but close enough that Braden could feel the heat radiating from Grusha's larger body. She had pulled her cloak tight and was staring out at the rain with an expression of stoic endurance. "Tell me about your clan," Braden said impulsively, then immediately regretted the question. "Sorry, that is probably too personal." Grusha was quiet for so long he thought she would not answer. Then she began speaking, her voice soft enough that he had to lean closer to hear over the rain. "We were Broken Tusk clan. Farmers mostly, though we had some warriors. My mother bred horses. My father worked metal. We lived in the borderlands because we believed coexistence with humans was possible, that trade could benefit both peoples. Were they wrong?" "They were murdered for that belief," Grusha said flatly. "Whether that makes them wrong or just unlucky is a question I cannot answer. I only know that when I joined the border patrol, other orcs called me a traitor and a coward. They said I had forgotten my people to serve those who killed them." Braden absorbed that, thinking about his own complicated relationship with his past. "But you stayed anyway." "I stayed because someone needs to prove that cooperation is possible, even if it costs me everything I have left." Grusha turned her head to look at him, and there was a fierce determination in her eyes that took his breath away. "I will not let fear and hatred win. Not again." Something shifted between them in that moment, some fundamental understanding that they were both trying to build something better from the ruins of terrible things. Braden held her gaze and nodded slowly. "Then I will do my best to be a partner worth having." Grusha's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "You have not run away yet. That is more than I expected." The rain continued for another hour before tapering off to a miserable drizzle. They resumed their patrol in wet clothes and mud-caked boots, following the border ridge north toward the most remote section of their territory. Grusha pointed out landmarks as they went. A lightning-struck tree that marked a river crossing, a peculiar rock formation that served as a waypoint, a clearing where smugglers were known to cache goods for later retrieval. "We will check that cache tomorrow," she said, gesturing toward the clearing. "If it has been disturbed, we follow the trail and document what we find. If we encounter active smuggling, we are authorized to confiscate goods and detain suspects for the nearest garrison." "Have you had to do that often?" "Twice. Both times the smugglers ran rather than fight. I let them go and took their goods. Better than bloodshed." Braden agreed with that assessment, relieved to learn that Grusha preferred de-escalation to violence. They made camp that night in a cave Grusha knew, a shallow depression in a hillside that kept them dry and concealed. She started a fire with practiced efficiency, and they dried their clothes while eating cold rations and listening to the sounds of the forest settling into darkness. "How did you learn all this?" Braden asked, gesturing vaguely at the cave and the surrounding wilderness. "Tracking, navigation, survival skills. Were you trained as a ranger before your clan was destroyed?" Grusha shook her head. "My father taught me to hunt. The rest I learned by necessity. After the clan died, I survived alone in these woods for 2 years before the Border Patrol found me and offered a position. I taught myself what I needed to know, or I learned from other rangers willing to share knowledge. That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was survival," Grusha said simply. "There is no alternative to survival except death, and I was not ready to die." Braden wanted to say something profound or comforting, but the words would not come. Instead, he simply sat with her in companionable silence, watching the fire burn down to embers as exhaustion pulled at his consciousness. When he finally rolled into his bedroll, he was asleep within moments, his last awareness being the sense of safety provided by Grusha's alert presence on the other side of the fire. The days began to blur together in a rhythm of patrol, camp, sleep, and repeat. They checked the smuggler's cache and found it empty. They investigated signs of a hunting party that had crossed the border but found nothing more concerning than deer tracks and discarded rabbit snares. They walked miles through forests and across streams, up rocky inclines and down into sheltered valleys, mapping their territory with meticulous attention to detail. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, they began to function as a team rather than two individuals sharing space. Braden learned to read Grusha's subtle signals. The way she tilted her head when she heard something unusual, the particular tension in her shoulders that meant she had spotted potential danger, the slight relaxation of her posture when she felt safe. In turn, Grusha seemed to adapt to his presence, no longer flinching when he moved close unexpectedly, and occasionally even initiating conversation. It was late afternoon of their 6th day out when they encountered their first real problem. Grusha froze mid-step, her hand flying up in a silent command to stop. Braden obeyed instantly, his own senses straining to identify whatever had caught her attention. Then he heard it, voices, too far away to make out words but close enough to be concerning in this remote area. Grusha motioned for him to follow and moved off the trail, circling through the undergrowth with impressive stealth for someone her size. Braden did his best to move quietly, though he felt clumsy compared to her fluid grace. They crept forward until the voices grew clearer, and Grusha found a vantage point behind a fallen log that gave them a view of a small clearing. 5 men were gathered around a campfire, and even from this distance, Braden could see the weapons bristling from their packs and belts. These were not hunters or travelers. The way they moved, the way they scanned their surroundings with constant vigilance, marked them as either soldiers or bandits, and since this area was well outside any military patrol zone, that left the latter option. Raiders, Grusha breathed, barely audible. Crossing into border territory, we need to know which direction they are heading and report to the garrison. Braden nodded understanding, settling in to observe. They watched for nearly an hour as the raiders prepared what looked like a more permanent camp, stringing up shelters and unpacking supplies that suggested they planned to stay for a while. When 2 of the men began discussing routes in voices that carried to the hidden rangers, Braden's stomach dropped. "The settlement at River's Bend is only lightly defended," one raider was saying. "We hit it fast, take what we can carry, and disappear back into the wilderness before they can mount a proper response." "What about the ranger patrols? This is orc territory. The patrols are thin and mostly those green-skinned monsters. We can handle them if necessary." Grusha's hand clenched into a fist, and Braden saw fury flash across her face before she controlled it. He touched her arm lightly, a gesture of solidarity, and she gave him a sharp nod of acknowledgement. They had heard enough. Grusha led them back through the forest, putting distance between themselves and the raiders before stopping to confer. "River's Bend is 2 days south," she said urgently. "We need to warn them and get reinforcements from the garrison, but if we leave to report, we lose track of these raiders." Braden thought quickly. "Can you track them if they move?" "Yes." "Then I will go to River's Bend and bring help. You shadow the raiders and make sure they do not change targets or disappear. We meet back here in 3 days with reinforcements." Grusha looked like she wanted to argue, but the logic was sound. "You will have to run most of the way to make that timeline." "I can manage," Braden assured her. "Just do not engage them alone if you can avoid it. There are too many, and we need you alive to guide the reinforcements in." Something flickered in Grusha's expression at that, but she nodded shortly. 3 days. If you do not return, I will assume you were delayed and take action alone. I will be back, Braden promised. He grabbed his pack, keeping only essential supplies, and started south at a pace that would eat miles, but was sustainable for the distance he needed to cover. Behind him, Grusha melted back into the forest toward the raider camp, and he had to trust that she would stay safe while he was gone. The next 2 days tested every ounce of Braden's endurance. He ran when the terrain allowed, walked at a brutal pace when it did not, and snatched brief hours of sleep when exhaustion forced him to stop. His legs burned, his lungs ached, and blisters formed on his feet, but he pushed through it all with the knowledge that lives depended on his speed. River's Bend appeared on the evening of the second day, a small farming community built where a tributary joined the main river. Braden staggered into the settlement looking like he had fought a battle, immediately demanding to see whoever was in charge. The village headman, a portly farmer named Edmund, listened to his report with growing alarm. "Raiders," Edmund repeated, his face paling. "How many did you say?" "At least 5, but there may be more. They are planning to attack within the next few days. We need to send word to the nearest garrison and prepare defenses." "The garrison is 4 days away," Edmund said, looking stricken. "Even if we send a rider immediately, they will not arrive in time." Braden forced his exhausted brain to think. "Then we prepare what defenses we can with what we have. Bring everyone into the village center. Post lookouts. Arm anyone who can hold a weapon, and I need volunteers to come with me back to the raider camp. My partner is tracking them, and with enough fighters, we can intercept them before they reach River's Bend." The discussion that followed was heated and chaotic, but eventually, Edmund assembled 8 men who had military experience or at least knew how to fight. They were not professional soldiers, but they were motivated by the knowledge that their homes and families were at risk. Braden gave them 2 hours to prepare and rest himself, using the time to eat, treat his blisters, and catch a brief sleep that felt like dying and being resurrected. They left River's Bend at dawn of the 3rd day, Braden leading the volunteer fighters north at a hard pace. His body protested every step, but adrenaline and determination kept him moving. They reached the rendezvous point that afternoon, and Braden's relief at finding Grusha waiting was so intense it made him dizzy. She looked tired but unharmed, and her eyes widened fractionally at the sight of the men he had brought. "You made good time." "Could not afford not to," Braden replied, then introduced the fighters. To their credit, the men handled meeting an orc ranger better than the rangers at the station had, perhaps because the immediate threat overrode their prejudices. "What is the situation?" "The raiders broke camp this morning and are moving south," Grusha reported. "They are about 4 hours ahead of us, moving slowly because they are planning an ambush point along the route to River's Bend. If we push hard, we can catch them while they are setting up before they are fully prepared." One of the volunteers, a grizzled veteran named Marcus, spoke up. "What are our numbers?" 5 raiders that we know of, 10 of us. We have the advantage if we use it correctly." Grusha crouched and began sketching in the dirt, outlining a plan that showed a tactical mind Braden had not yet seen in action. "We split into 2 groups. One comes from the south, making noise and drawing their attention. The other circles from the north and hits them from behind. Fast, coordinated, and we focus on disarming rather than killing if possible." "Why not killing?" one of the younger volunteers asked nervously. "Because killing is final, and we may need information about whether there are more raiders or other threats we have not identified," Grusha said calmly. "Also because I prefer not to kill unless necessary. You may disagree, but this is my territory and my plan." Marcus studied her for a moment, then nodded with what looked like respect. "Solid reasoning. I will lead the southern group. Braden, you should go with the Orc Ranger since you two are used to working together. We will give you an hour to get into position, then make our approach." The plan was set. Braden and Grusha led half the fighters north, circling wide around the raider position that Grusha had marked. The terrain grew rougher, slowing their progress, but Grusha navigated it with the certainty of someone who knew every tree and stone. When they finally reached the position she wanted, Braden could see the raiders below, setting up barricades and traps along a narrow pass where the trail funneled between two rocky outcrops. "Wait for Marcus's signal," Grusha whispered. "When we hear the commotion, we move fast and hit hard. Target the leader first. He is the tall one with the red scarf." The minutes crawled past with agonizing slowness. Braden's heart hammered in his chest, and he could see similar tension in the faces of the men crouched nearby. Then, faintly, they heard shouting from the south, and the raiders immediately sprang into defensive positions, weapons drawn and attention focused entirely on the approaching threat. "Now," Grusha said, and she was moving before the word finished leaving her mouth. Braden and the others followed, charging down the slope with weapons ready. The surprise was total. The raiders barely had time to register the attack from behind before Grusha's group was on them. Braden saw Grusha tackle the leader, using her superior size and strength to bear him to the ground and disarm him with brutal efficiency. The other raiders tried to respond, but they were caught between two groups and outnumbered. The fight was short and vicious. Braden engaged one raider who swung a cudgel at his head, ducking under the blow and slamming his shoulder into the man's midsection. They went down in a tangle of limbs, and Braden managed to pin the raider and twist the cudgel from his grip. Around him, similar struggles played out, made chaotic by adrenaline and the close quarters. It was over in less than 5 minutes. 3 raiders were subdued and restrained. One had fled into the forest, pursued by 2 of the volunteers. And one lay motionless on the ground, a knife wound in his side that poured red onto the rocky soil. The young volunteer who had struck the blow stood over him, white-faced and shaking. Grusha immediately moved to the fallen raider, assessing the injury with hands that were surprisingly gentle despite her fierce appearance. "He is still alive, but this is serious. We need to stop the bleeding and get him to someone who can treat this properly." She worked with calm competence, directing volunteers to apply pressure and prepare a makeshift stretcher. Braden helped secure the prisoners, who stared at Grusha with open fear that turned to confusion when she carefully tended their injured companion. The leader, nursing a likely broken arm from where Grusha had taken him down, actually looked chagrined. "You are the Orc Ranger they talk about in the settlements," he muttered. "They said you were fair. Guess they were right." "Fair does not mean foolish," Grusha replied without looking up from her work. "You picked the wrong target, and now you will answer for it. Be grateful we arrived before you could harm innocents." The volunteer who had fled returned with one of his companions, reporting that the 5th raider had escaped into the deep forest and would not be caught without a dedicated pursuit. Marcus made the call to let him go, focusing instead on getting the prisoners and the injured man back to River's Bend, where proper justice could be administered. The journey back was slow and tense, with the fighters taking turns guarding prisoners and carrying the injured raider on the stretcher Grusha had fashioned. Braden found himself walking beside her, and when their eyes met, something passed between them that felt like recognition. They had just functioned as a seamless unit under pressure, trusting each other's judgment and abilities without hesitation. "You handled that well," Braden said quietly. Grusha shrugged, but he thought he detected a hint of pleasure at the compliment. We both did. Your warning saved lives. If you had been even a few hours slower, those raiders might have reached River's Bend before we could stop them. I had good motivation to run fast, Braden replied. Could not leave my partner alone in the wilderness longer than necessary. Grusha's tusks showed in what was definitely a smile this time, brief but genuine. Your partner appreciates that. They reached River's Bend as twilight fell, and the settlement greeted them with a mixture of relief and celebration. The headmen immediately took charge of the prisoners, promising they would be held for the garrison to collect. The injured raider was taken to the village healer, who pronounced that Grusha's field treatment had likely saved his life. The volunteers dispersed to their homes and families, exhausted but satisfied. Braden and Grusha were offered food and lodging in the village center, and for once, Braden saw none of the hostility that had marked their previous encounters with human settlements. The people of River's Bend had been saved by an orc ranger's skill and dedication, and that reality overrode whatever prejudices they might have harbored. Children stared at Grusha with curiosity instead of fear. Adults thanked her with genuine warmth. "This is strange," Grusha murmured to Braden as they ate dinner in the communal hall. "I am not accustomed to being welcomed." "Get used to it," Braden suggested. "You are a hero here now. They will remember this." Grusha looked uncomfortable with the attention, but also pleased in a way that made Braden's chest feel tight with an emotion he could not quite name. They finished their meal and retired to the guest quarters, where 2 beds had been prepared in a small room that felt almost luxurious after days of sleeping on the ground. As they settled in for the night, Braden found himself reluctant to let the silence grow. "Grusha, can I ask you something?" "You just did," she pointed out, but her tone was lighter than her words. "But yes, ask." "When did you stop thinking of me as a liability?" Grusha considered the question seriously. "I never thought of you as a liability, inexperienced perhaps, untested, but you proved yourself quickly. You listen, you adapt, and you do not let prejudice cloud your judgment. Those qualities are rare. You make me sound better than I am." "I make you sound accurate," Grusha corrected. "Do not diminish yourself. You ran for 2 days straight to save people you had never met, then led fighters into a dangerous situation without hesitation. That takes courage and commitment." Braden felt heat rise to his face, unexpectedly moved by her matter-of-fact assessment. "You are not exactly lacking in courage yourself. That was impressive work today, both the tactical planning and the way you handled the aftermath." "We work well together," Grusha said, and there was something in her voice that suggested she found that fact both surprising and significant. "I have been alone for a long time. It is different, having a partner I can trust. Different good or different bad, different good," Grusha admitted softly. "Very good." The moment stretched between them, weighted with implications neither seemed ready to address directly. Finally, Braden cleared his throat and settled into his bed. "We should rest. Tomorrow we need to report to the garrison and file all the necessary paperwork." "Braden?" "Yes. Thank you for coming back, for bringing help, for being the partner you promised to be." The words settled into Braden's chest and took root there, warm and insistent. "Always," he replied, and meant it more than he had meant anything in a long time. Sleep claimed them both quickly, the exhaustion of the past 3 days finally catching up. When morning came, they set out for the garrison at a much more leisurely pace. The urgency passed, and the crisis resolved. The garrison commander listened to their joint report with growing approval, particularly impressed by their coordination and the peaceful resolution of what could have been a bloodbath. "Exemplary work," the commander declared, a burly man whose scars spoke of decades of military service. "Both of you. This is exactly what Command hoped to achieve with the Mixed Patrol Initiative, proof that cooperation benefits everyone. He processed their paperwork efficiently and sent them back to their patrol with orders to continue their excellent work. As they walked away from the garrison, Braden felt lighter than he had in months, as if some burden he had been carrying since the war had finally been set down. "What now?" he asked Grusha. "Now we return to the routine. Walk the patrol, check the waypoints, watch for smugglers and threats." She glanced at him sidelong. "Unless you would prefer a different assignment after all the excitement." "Not even slightly," Braden said firmly. "I signed up for this patrol, and I intend to see it through." Grusha's smile was still small, but it was becoming more frequent, and Braden was beginning to treasure each one like a rare gem. They walked north together, falling back into the rhythm they had developed, and Braden realized with startling clarity that he was happy. Despite the danger, despite the hardship, despite all the complications of their situation, he was genuinely happy for the first time since before the war. The weeks that followed settled into a pattern that felt increasingly comfortable. They completed their northern patrol and cycled back to the way station, where the same rangers from before greeted them with notably more respect. Derek actually apologized for his initial coldness, admitting that seeing Grusha in action had changed his perspective. The young ranger, Will, remained wary but at least kept his opinions to himself. They reported in regularly, documenting the state of the border and noting minor incidents that required attention but not intervention. They encountered a family of human homesteaders who had built a cabin just inside the boundary and helped them understand the regulations they needed to follow. They assisted an orc hunting party that had gotten lost in unfamiliar territory, and Grusha's ability to speak both languages smoothed what could have been a tense encounter. And through it all, Braden found himself increasingly aware of Grusha in ways that had nothing to do with professional partnership. The way her laugh sounded when he managed to surprise her with dry humor. The competent grace of her movements when she demonstrated tracking techniques. The fierce intelligence in her eyes when she puzzled through a problem. The unexpected gentleness in her hands when she treated a sprained ankle he had sustained on uneven ground. He told himself it was simply respect and friendship, the natural result of spending so much time together in challenging circumstances. But late at night, lying in his bedroll across the fire from where she slept, Braden could not quite convince himself that respect and friendship fully explained the way his heart raced when she smiled at him, or the fierce protectiveness he felt whenever anything threatened her, or the way he found himself inventing excuses to be close to her. It was irrational, it was impossible, it was every kind of foolish, and yet the feelings persisted, growing stronger with each passing day. Spring turned gradually toward summer, the days growing longer and warmer. They adapted their patrol schedule to avoid the worst heat of midday, traveling in early morning and late afternoon instead. The landscape transformed from mud and rain to lush green growth, wildflowers blooming in impossible profusion across the meadows they traversed. It was during one of these meadow crossings, with the sun warm on their backs and the air sweet with pollen, that Grusha suddenly stopped walking and turned to face Braden with an intensity that made his breath catch. "I need to tell you something," she said abruptly. Braden's heart immediately began pounding, though he could not have said whether from hope or fear. "What is it?" Grusha seemed to struggle for words, her usual confidence deserting her. "This partnership. It has become more to me than I expected, more than professional collaboration. I value your companionship, your presence. I find myself thinking about you when we are apart, looking forward to our patrols together, dreading the possibility that command might reassign one of us. Braden stared at her, barely daring to breathe. "Grusha, let me finish," she interrupted, and he could see the vulnerability beneath her fierce exterior. "I know this is inappropriate. I know humans and orcs are not supposed to feel this way about each other. I know there are 1,000 reasons this is a terrible idea. But I also know that I care for you in a way that goes beyond friendship, and I needed you to know that, even if nothing can come of it." The confession hung between them in the golden afternoon light. Braden felt like the world had tilted on its axis, everything familiar suddenly strange and new. He stepped closer, close enough that he could see the exact shade of green in her skin and the nervous tension around her eyes. "What if I told you I feel the same way?" he said quietly. Grusha's eyes widened. "Do you?" "I have been trying not to," Braden admitted. "Telling myself it was impossible, that I was being foolish, that I was misreading the signals between us. But yes, Grusha, I care for you. More than I thought I was capable of caring for anyone after everything I have been through. You are strong and brave and brilliant, and I think about you constantly, and when I imagine my future, you are in it." "Braden," Grusha breathed, and suddenly she was closing the remaining distance between them, her hands coming up to frame his face with a gentleness that belied her strength. "This will not be easy. People will judge us. Humans and orcs both. Your career could suffer. Mine definitely will. We will face hostility and prejudice and possibly worse." "I know," Braden said, lifting his own hands to rest against her shoulders, feeling the warmth of her through her clothes. "But I have spent too much of my life letting fear dictate my choices. I fought in a war that achieved nothing but death and destruction. I have seen what hatred and division create. If we can be something different, something better, then I want to try. I want to try with you." Grusha made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob, and then she was pulling him closer, and he was meeting her halfway, and they were kissing with a desperation that spoke of weeks of suppressed longing. Her tusks were strange against his mouth, but not unpleasant, just different, just uniquely her. She tasted like the mint leaves she chewed and smelled like leather and pine and smoke. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grusha rested her forehead against his and closed her eyes. "I was so afraid you would reject me." "Never," Braden promised fiercely. "I will never reject you. You are the best thing that has happened to me in years, possibly ever." They stood there in the meadow, wrapped in each other and oblivious to everything else, while the sun tracked slowly across the sky and painted everything in shades of gold. Eventually, practical concerns reasserted themselves, and they reluctantly separated enough to continue walking, though now their hands were joined, fingers interlaced in a claim that felt monumental. "We should be careful about how we present this," Grusha said as they walked. "Not because I am ashamed, but because strategic discretion will make things easier. If Command thinks this is affecting our work, they might separate us." "Agreed," Braden said, though the thought of being separated from Grusha now felt physically painful. "We keep things professional in public. Save the personal for when we are alone on patrol." "Which is most of the time," Grusha pointed out with a hint of her usual humor. "This might be the first relationship in history where the couple spends more time alone together in the wilderness than they do around other people." Braden laughed, the sound bubbling up from some place of pure joy he had forgotten existed. "I suppose we are doing everything backwards. Most people date in civilization and then maybe go camping occasionally. We are camping constantly and occasionally seeing civilization." "We were never going to be like most people," Grusha said, squeezing his hand. "We might as well embrace it. The shift in their relationship added a new dimension to the patrol that made even routine tasks feel charged with significance. They still performed their duties with complete professionalism, checking waypoints and documenting observations, but now they also stole moments for themselves. A kiss while refilling water skins at a stream, sitting pressed close together while eating dinner, falling asleep with her head pillowed on his shoulder, waking to find his arm wrapped around her waist. It was in one of these quiet moments, camped under a canopy of stars so bright they seemed close enough to touch, that Grusha spoke again about her past. They were lying side by side, watching the constellations wheel slowly overhead, and her voice was soft in the darkness. "When my clan was destroyed, I thought I would never belong anywhere again," she said. "I thought that loss had broken something fundamental in me. For years, I existed, but I did not really live. I went through the motions of survival without connecting to anyone or anything." Braden listened without interrupting, his hand finding hers in the dark. "Then command assigned me this impossible human partner," Grusha continued, and he could hear the smile in her voice. "Someone who looked at me and saw a person instead of a monster, who trusted me when I had given him no particular reason to trust, who ran himself to exhaustion to protect strangers and then came back like he promised. You reminded me what it felt like to matter to someone, to be valued, to belong. You matter to me more than I can express," Braden said, his throat tight with emotion. "You have given me purpose again. Before this patrol, I was just drifting, trying to outrun ghosts and guilt. You made me remember why I wanted to help people in the first place. You showed me that redemption is possible, that good things can grow from terrible circumstances." Grusha turned onto her side to face him, her features just barely visible in the starlight. "What do we do when the patrol rotation ends? They will reassign us eventually, give us leave time or new partners or different territories." It was a question Braden had been carefully not thinking about, but now it demanded to be addressed. "We request to stay partnered. Document how effective we are together, make the case that splitting us up would be counterproductive, and if they refuse, we figure something else out. Maybe we both transfer to a different posting where they need a team. Maybe we leave the patrol service entirely and find something else to do. You would do that. Give up your career." "I would do whatever necessary to stay with you," Braden said simply. "The career matters, but you matter more. If I have to choose, there is no question what I would choose." Grusha kissed him then, slow and deep and full of unspoken promises. When they finally settled back into their bedrolls, still holding hands across the space between them, Braden felt more certain of his future than he had in his entire adult life. The summer progressed with lazy heat that made their patrols more challenging but no less rewarding. They adapted to the temperature by starting earlier and resting during the worst heat of midday, finding shaded streams where they could cool off and talk about everything and nothing. Braden learned about orc culture, the complex clan structures and honor codes that governed interactions. Grusha learned about human military traditions and the reasons behind customs that had previously seemed arbitrary to her. They also began to encounter more evidence of changing attitudes toward interspecies cooperation. Human settlers they met were increasingly willing to work with orcish neighbors. Orc hunters they encountered showed less automatic hostility toward human rangers. The stories of their successful raid intervention had spread, growing in the retelling, and while Grusha rolled her eyes at some of the more exaggerated versions, Braden noticed that the underlying message was positive. It was during a resupply stop at a frontier trading post that they received news that would significantly impact their situation. The postmaster, a chatty woman who seemed to know everyone's business for 100 miles in any direction, greeted them with unusual excitement. "You two are famous," she announced, handing over their supply requisition. "There is talk of expanding the mixed patrol program across the entire frontier. Command is using you as the model for how it should work." Braden and Grusha exchanged glances, trying to gauge whether this was good news or complicated news. "Expanding the program," Braden prompted. "Another dozen partnerships being formed over the next few months," the postmaster confirmed. "And they are asking for experienced teams to help train the new pairings. You two might be getting official orders about it soon." After they left the trading post, Grusha voiced the concern they were both thinking. "If they want us to train others, that means more scrutiny. More time around other people. More opportunities for someone to notice that we are more than professional partners. It also means we could argue that our partnership is too valuable to disrupt," Braden countered. "If we are the model, they will be reluctant to change what works. Unless they discover we are romantically involved, in which case they will question our objectivity and effectiveness," Grusha said grimly. "Forbidden relationships between partners are a classic reason for reassignment." Braden could not argue with that logic. They spent the rest of the day walking in troubled silence, each wrestling with the implications. By the time they made camp that evening, the weight of uncertainty had become oppressive. "What if we requested a formal partnership extension?" Braden suggested as they prepared dinner. "Made it clear that we want to continue working together regardless of what other assignments come our way. Then if feelings come out later, at least we have established a track record of professionalism first." Grusha considered this while stirring the pot of stew they were sharing. "That could work. It establishes our commitment to the partnership without revealing the full nature of it, and it gives us time to figure out how to navigate the complications. Or we could just be honest," Braden said impulsively. "Tell Command that we are in a relationship, but that it has not impacted our work, that if anything, it has made us more effective because we trust each other completely." "That is incredibly idealistic," Grusha said, but not unkindly. "It assumes Command will respond rationally rather than reactively. Humans and orcs falling in love is still strange enough that many will assume it must be unhealthy or inappropriate. So we hide." Braden felt frustration rising. "Pretend we are something we are not." "We are cautious," Grusha corrected. "There is a difference. We protect what we have built while we figure out the best way forward. Rushing into declarations before we understand the political landscape is how we lose everything." Braden knew she was right, even if he hated the necessity of discretion. They were pioneering something new, and that meant navigating without clear maps or guidelines. "I just hate feeling like we have to apologize for caring about each other." "I know," Grusha said softly, setting aside the stew to move closer. "I hate it too, but I also know that preserving our partnership is worth some temporary discretion. We will find the right moment to be open. Until then, we have each other, and that is enough." She kissed him gently, and Braden let himself be reassured by her steady confidence. They ate dinner pressed close together, talking about safer subjects and letting the worry recede into background noise. The official orders arrived 2 weeks later, delivered by a courier who had ridden hard to catch up with their patrol. Braden broke the seal and read aloud while Grusha listened intently. "Effective immediately. Rangers Braden Rourke and Grusha are designated as training supervisors for the Border Patrol Mixed Partnership Initiative," he read. "You are ordered to report to the Central Garrison 1 month hence to begin orientation duties for 6 newly formed partnerships. This assignment will last approximately 3 months, after which you will return to regular patrol duties. Your exemplary service and successful coordination make you ideal candidates for this training role. 3 months away from the frontier, Grusha said quietly. 3 months surrounded by other rangers and command staff. 3 months proving that mixed partnerships work, Braden countered. Sharing what we have learned so that others can be as successful as we have been. This is important work, Grusha. I know, she sighed. I simply prefer the wilderness to garrison life. Too many people, too many eyes watching. We will manage, Braden assured her, though privately he shared her concerns. And maybe it will be good to demonstrate that cooperation is possible on a larger scale. They spent the remaining weeks of their patrol completing their circuit and documenting everything they had learned about effective partnership strategies. Braden wrote detailed reports about communication techniques and tactical coordination. Grusha created maps and resource guides for navigating orc territories and understanding cultural differences. Together, they compiled a comprehensive training manual that would hopefully help the new partnerships avoid the pitfalls they had navigated through trial and error. The journey to the central garrison took 4 days, traveling through increasingly civilized territory until the wilderness gave way to cleared farmland and established roads. The garrison itself was an impressive structure, a walled compound that housed several hundred rangers and support staff. As they approached the gates, Braden felt Grusha's tension radiating like heat. "It will be fine," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear. "We have done nothing wrong. We are good at our jobs. Focus on that." Grusha nodded tightly but said nothing. They were waved through the gates by guards who stared openly at Grusha, and Braden had to suppress a surge of protective anger at their poorly concealed hostility. Inside, they were directed to the command building where they would receive their specific training assignments. Commander Harris, the garrison's ranking officer, received them in his office with the clipped efficiency of someone perpetually short on time. He was younger than Braden expected, perhaps 40, with the hardened look of someone who had seen significant combat. "Rourke, Grusha," he greeted, gesturing for them to sit. "I have read your reports with great interest. Your success in the north has become something of a legend. 5 raider captures, 17 smuggler interdictions, and peaceful resolution of 4 potentially violent encounters between human and orc groups. Impressive." "We were doing our jobs, sir," Braden said carefully. "You were doing your jobs exceptionally well," Harris corrected. "Which is why I need you to help others achieve similar results. The political pressure to make this initiative work is immense. Every failure is scrutinized. Every success is celebrated. You two represent the best possible outcome, and I need you to explain how others can replicate that." He outlined the training program in detail. 6 new partnerships, each pairing a human ranger with an orc ranger, would arrive over the next week. Braden and Grusha would lead them through both classroom instruction and practical exercises, covering everything from basic survival skills to cultural sensitivity to combat coordination. The goal was to prepare them for deployment to various frontier sectors within 3 months. "I will be honest with you," Harris said, his expression growing more serious. "Not everyone supports this initiative. There are rangers in this garrison who believe orcs cannot be trusted. There are politicians who think we are wasting resources on doomed experiments. Your job is to prove them wrong. Show that cooperation is possible, that trust can be built, that the frontier is safer when humans and orcs work together." "We understand, sir," Grusha said, speaking for the first time. Her voice was steady despite the tension Braden could see in her shoulders. Harris nodded. "Good. You will be quartered in the officer's wing. Separate rooms but adjacent. Training begins in 1 week. Use that time to prepare your materials and get comfortable with the garrison layout. Dismissed. They left the office in silence, following a young ranger who showed them to their assigned quarters. True to Harris's word, they had been given adjacent rooms, small but private spaces that felt luxurious after months of sleeping on the ground. The ranger left them alone, and Braden immediately moved to the door connecting the two rooms, testing it to find it unlocked. "At least we can visit each other without going into the hall," he observed, trying to lighten the mood. Grusha managed a faint smile. "Small mercies." She looked around her room, taking in the narrow bed, the simple desk, the single window overlooking the garrison yard. "This is going to be difficult." "I know," Braden agreed, "but we will get through it, together." The week of preparation passed in a blur of activity. They refined their training materials, met with the other instructors who would be teaching specialized skills, and navigated the complex social dynamics of a garrison where their partnership was simultaneously celebrated and viewed with suspicion. Braden noticed the way some rangers went out of their way to greet Grusha respectfully, while others ostentatiously avoided her or made comments just loud enough to be heard about monsters and savages. Grusha handled it all with admirable composure, keeping her expression neutral and her responses professional. But Braden saw the toll it took, the way she retreated into silence after particularly difficult encounters, the tension that never quite left her shoulders. At night, he would slip through the connecting door between their rooms and hold her while she decompressed, offering what comfort he could through presence and touch. "I do not know how to do this," she admitted one evening, her face buried against his shoulder. "On patrol, it was just us. I could be myself. Here, I am constantly performing, constantly proving I am not a threat, constantly aware that one mistake could undermine everything we are trying to build." "You are doing brilliantly," Braden assured her, stroking her hair. "I know it does not feel that way, but you are. People are watching you and seeing someone competent and professional and worthy of respect. That matters." "Does it matter enough?" Grusha asked quietly. "Or are we just delaying the inevitable? Maybe humans and orcs are not meant to work together this closely. Maybe the prejudices are too deep." "No," Braden said firmly, tilting her face up to meet his eyes. "I refuse to believe that. Yes, it is hard. Yes, we face resistance. But look at what we have accomplished. Look at the lives we have saved and the cooperation we have fostered. That is real. That matters. And we are going to teach others how to replicate it, and slowly, one partnership at a time, we are going to change the frontier." Grusha searched his face, then nodded slowly. "You have more faith than I do." "Then let me carry some of that burden for now," Braden said. "You can borrow my faith until yours recovers." She kissed him then, deep and grateful, and they spent the rest of the evening simply being together, letting the world and its complications recede for a few precious hours. The new partnerships arrived on schedule, 12 rangers who looked varying degrees of nervous, excited, and skeptical. Braden and Grusha gathered them in the training yard and spent the first day simply getting to know them, learning their backgrounds and concerns and hopes for the program. The humans ranged from idealistic young rangers, eager to prove themselves, to grizzled veterans who viewed the assignment as punishment or peculiar experiment. The orcs were uniformly wary, their body language defensive and their responses cautious. Braden recognized that wariness immediately. It was the same careful control Grusha had demonstrated when they first met. "Over the next 3 months, we are going to teach you how to function as effective partners," Braden told the assembled group. "That means more than just learning to fight together or split watch duties. It means understanding each other's perspectives, respecting each other's abilities, and building genuine trust." It also means accepting that you will fail sometimes, Grusha added. You will miscommunicate. You will frustrate each other. You will question whether this partnership can work. Those moments are normal and expected. What matters is how you respond to them. They spent the first week on basic foundations: communication drills, cultural education, shared survival exercises that forced the partnerships to rely on each other. Braden watched the dynamics develop with close attention, noting which pairs were connecting naturally and which were struggling with deep-seated prejudices or personality conflicts. One pairing in particular concerned him. The human ranger, a man named Thomas, made no effort to hide his disdain for his orc partner, a young female named Kara. He followed orders but with obvious reluctance, and his comments were frequently dismissive or insulting. Kara responded with silent endurance that reminded Braden painfully of how Grusha had been treated in their early days. After a particularly tense training exercise where Thomas had openly criticized Kara's tracking skills despite her being demonstrably better at it than he was, Braden pulled him aside for a private conversation. "Ranger Thomas, we need to discuss your attitude toward your partner." Thomas's jaw tightened. "My attitude is fine. I am following orders and completing the training." "You are doing the minimum required while making Kara's life miserable," Braden said bluntly. "That is not acceptable. This program requires genuine cooperation, not grudging compliance." "With all due respect, sir, I did not volunteer for this assignment. I was ordered to partner with an orc and I am doing so, but you cannot order me to like it." Braden felt his temper rise but kept his voice level. "You are right. I cannot order you to like your partner. But I can order you to treat her with respect and professionalism, and if you cannot do that, I will recommend you be removed from the program and reassigned elsewhere." "That would suit me fine," Thomas shot back. "It would not suit Kara fine," Braden said sharply. "She has done nothing to deserve your contempt. She is skilled, dedicated, and trying her best to make this partnership work despite your hostility. You are the weak link here, not her, so you have a choice. Either adjust your attitude and give this a genuine effort, or request transfer and let someone else have the opportunity you are wasting." Thomas looked like he wanted to argue further but apparently thought better of it. He gave a stiff nod and walked away, his posture radiating resentment. Braden sighed, knowing he had not really solved the problem, just postponed it. That evening he found Grusha in their shared study space, reviewing training notes. He collapsed into the chair beside her and rubbed his face wearily. "Thomas," Grusha guessed, "how did you know?" "I have been watching the same issues you have. He reminds me of the rangers at the first way station we visited, all suspicion and prejudice with no willingness to challenge his own assumptions." She set down her notes and looked at him seriously. "Some people cannot be taught, Braden. Or rather, they can only be taught through hard experience that forces them to confront their beliefs. Words will not reach him. So what do? We document his behavior, continue to demand professional conduct, and hope that either he improves or he requests transfer before he causes serious damage." Grusha's expression was resigned. "Not every partnership will succeed. We can provide the tools and training, but ultimately the individuals have to choose to use them." "I hate that you are right," Braden admitted. "I want to fix this. I want everyone to have what we have." "What we have is rare," Grusha said gently. "We were fortunate in each other. Not everyone will be so lucky." The weeks progressed with mixed results. Some partnerships flourished, the rangers developing genuine rapport and effective coordination that exceeded even Braden's optimistic expectations. Others struggled but showed improvement, working through their difficulties with increasing competence. and a few, like Thomas and Kara, remained stubbornly dysfunctional despite every intervention. It was during a complex field exercise in the forests surrounding the garrison that things came to a head. The partnerships had been given a scenario requiring them to track and intercept a simulated smuggling operation while navigating difficult terrain and coordinating through limited communication. Braden and Grusha were observing from a distance, ready to intervene if anything went seriously wrong. Thomas and Kara's partnership was predictably chaotic. Thomas insisted on taking the lead despite Kara's superior tracking skills, making poor route choices that cost them time. When Kara suggested alternatives, Thomas dismissed her ideas without consideration. The tension between them was palpable even from where Braden and Grusha watched. Then, disaster. Thomas stepped carelessly onto unstable ground near a stream bank, and the earth gave way beneath him, sending him tumbling down a steep slope toward the rushing water below. Kara reacted instantly, lunging forward to grab his arm before he went over the edge. For a moment, they hung there, Kara's superior strength the only thing keeping Thomas from a dangerous fall into the icy stream. Braden and Grusha were already running toward them, but it was clear they would not arrive in time if Kara could not hold on. Thomas stared up at his partner with wide, terrified eyes as she strained to pull him back to safety, her muscles standing out with the effort. Finally, with a grunt of exertion, Kara heaved Thomas back onto solid ground, where he collapsed gasping. By the time Braden and Grusha reached them, Thomas was sitting up, and Kara was checking him for injuries with professional efficiency despite her own exhaustion. Thomas looked shaken, his face pale, and when Kara's hands found a twisted ankle, he flinched but did not pull away. "Can you walk?" Kara asked, her voice carefully neutral. Thomas tested his weight and grimaced. "Not well. I think it is sprained." "I will help you back to the garrison," Kara said, offering her arm for support. Thomas hesitated for just a moment, then accepted, allowing the orc ranger to bear much of his weight as they began the slow journey back. Braden and Grusha followed at a discreet distance, and Braden saw Grusha's slight smile. "Sometimes the teaching moment finds itself," she murmured. Indeed, when they reached the garrison medical facility and Thomas's ankle had been properly wrapped, Braden observed a subtle shift in the man's demeanor toward Kara. The open contempt was gone, replaced by something more complex. When the pairs reassembled for evening debrief, Thomas spoke up unexpectedly. "I need to apologize to my partner," he said stiffly. "I have been unprofessional and dismissive. Today, Ranger Kara saved my life when she had every reason to let me fall. I owe her my thanks and my respect." He turned to face Kara directly. "I am sorry. I will do better." Kara studied him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Then she gave a single nod. "Apology accepted. We start fresh from here." The change in Thomas was not overnight, but it was real. Over the remaining weeks of training, Braden watched him slowly transform from hostile skeptic to cautious ally to, eventually, something close to a genuine partner. The crisis had forced him to confront his prejudices in a way that lectures never could. As the training program neared its conclusion, Braden felt cautiously optimistic about the outcomes. 5 of the 6 partnerships were functioning well, with solid communication and mutual respect. Even Thomas and Kara had developed an effective working relationship, though it lacked the easy warmth of some of the other pairs. The 6th partnership had mutually agreed to separate, recognizing that despite their best efforts, their personalities were simply incompatible for this kind of close collaboration. Commander Harris called Braden and Grusha to his office for a final evaluation meeting. He listened to their reports with satisfaction, nodding at their assessments of each partnership. "Excellent work," he declared when they finished. "Better results than I honestly expected. 5 successful partnerships out of 6 is a remarkable success rate. Command will be pleased." He leaned back in his chair, studying them both. "I have a proposal for you. We need to expand this program further, and we need experienced trainers to make that happen. I would like to offer you both permanent positions here at the garrison as training supervisors. You would oversee future partner orientations, develop advanced coursework, and serve as advocates for the Mixed Patrol Initiative." The offer hung in the air between them. It was a significant opportunity, a chance to influence the program on a much larger scale. It was also everything Braden had been dreading. He glanced at Grusha and saw his own conflict reflected in her expression. "That is a generous offer, sir," Braden said carefully. "May we have time to consider it, of course. I need an answer within 2 weeks, before you would otherwise return to field patrol." Harris's expression grew more serious. "I will be frank with you both. The 2 of you are the best advertisement this program has. Your success in the field, your effectiveness as trainers, your obvious mutual respect. You represent what we are trying to achieve across the entire frontier. Taking this position would mean giving up field work, but it would also mean shaping the future of human-orc cooperation in profound ways." They left his office in troubled silence, retiring to Braden's room where they could speak freely. Grusha paced like a caged animal, her agitation clear in every movement. "I cannot do this," she said finally. "I cannot spend the rest of my career confined to this garrison, surrounded by politics and prejudice and constant scrutiny. I need the wilderness. I need the freedom. I need to be able to breathe." "I know," Braden said quietly. "I feel the same way. The training was valuable, but it has also reminded me why I left the military in the first place. I did not survive war to spend my life behind walls." Grusha stopped pacing and faced him. "But if we decline, are we being selfish? Harris is right that we could influence the program significantly. Help more rangers, save more lives through better training. We can do that from the field too," Braden argued. "Lead by example rather than classroom instruction. Show that long-term mixed partnerships are sustainable. That is valuable data in its own right." They sat together in silence for long minutes, each wrestling with the decision. Finally, Grusha spoke again. "I want to go back to our patrol. I want it to be just us again in the forests and mountains where we can be ourselves without constantly performing for others. But I also want to do what is right, what serves the larger good. I do not know how to reconcile those desires." Braden took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "What if the right thing is being honest about what we can realistically sustain? We proved we can train others. We shared our knowledge and experience. But trying to operate indefinitely in an environment that drains us both will eventually make us less effective, not more. Better to return to field work where we thrive than burn out in a garrison posting we are not suited for." "You are giving me permission to choose selfishly," Grusha observed. "I am reminding you that taking care of ourselves is not selfish if it means we can continue doing good work long-term," Braden corrected. "And I am admitting that I want to go back to our patrol, to the life we built together in the wilderness. Is that selfish? Maybe, but it is also honest." Grusha leaned against him, her head resting on his shoulder. "Then we decline the offer. We thank Commander Harris for the opportunity and request return to field patrol, and we deal with whatever consequences come from that choice." "Agreed," Braden said, feeling relief wash through him. "We will explain our reasoning and hope he understands." 2 days later, they delivered their decision to Commander Harris. He listened to their carefully prepared explanation with an inscrutable expression, then nodded slowly. "I am disappointed but not entirely surprised," he admitted. "I suspected you were not suited for permanent garrison duty." "Very well. You will return to your Northern Patrol assignment as requested, but I want you to understand that this offer will remain open should you change your minds. The program needs voices like yours at the leadership level." "We appreciate that, sir," Braden said sincerely. "And we remain committed to the program's success. We will continue to document our experiences and provide feedback that can improve training protocols." "See that you do," Harris said. Dismissed. They left the garrison 1 week later, feeling like prisoners released from confinement. The weight that had settled on Braden's shoulders during their months of training lifted with every mile they traveled north toward the frontier. Beside him, Grusha's posture relaxed gradually, the tension draining away as civilization gave way to wilderness. "I did not realize how much I was suffocating until I could breathe again," she said as they made camp their first night back on patrol. The familiar sounds of the forest surrounded them, so different from the constant noise of the garrison. "It felt like wearing clothes that did not quite fit," Braden agreed, setting up their shared shelter with practiced efficiency. "Necessary for the task, but never comfortable." They fell back into their patrol routine with relief that felt like coming home. The Northern Territory welcomed them with summer fullness, the forests lush and the streams running clear and cold from mountain snowmelt. They checked their waypoints and found everything in reasonable order, evidence that other rangers had covered their circuit during their absence, but had left no major problems unresolved. It was during one of their rest stops, sitting beside a waterfall that created a natural pool perfect for cooling off, that Grusha voiced the question that had been hovering unspoken between them. "What happens when autumn comes?" "When our rotation would typically end, and we would return to the garrison for winter assignments." Braden had been thinking about this too. "We request an extension. Make the case that year-round patrols would provide better security and more consistent presence. Winter travel is harder, but we have proven we can handle difficult conditions." "That would mean staying in the field through winter," Grusha said slowly. "Living in way stations and caves, dealing with snow and cold and isolation. It would be the hardest season." "Yes," Braden agreed. "But it would also mean continuing to work together, building something permanent instead of temporary, proving that this partnership is not just successful but essential." Grusha met his eyes, and he saw hope and fear mingled in her expression. "You would do that?" "Commit to winter on the frontier, away from any support or relief, with you." "Without hesitation," Braden said simply. "I meant what I said before. I want a future with you in it. If that future is on the frontier, then that is where I want to be." "Braden," Grusha said, her voice thick with emotion, "if we request this, if we make it clear that we refuse separate assignments, people will suspect there is more to our partnership than professional collaboration." "Let them suspect," Braden said with more confidence than he felt. "We will have done nothing wrong. Our work speaks for itself, and maybe it is time to stop hiding what we are to each other." Grusha was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing risks and possibilities. Then she nodded firmly. "Then we make the request. We commit to year-round patrol and face whatever consequences come." They submitted their formal request the following week through the way station's communication system. A carefully worded proposal that emphasized the security benefits of continuous patrol presence, while noting their proven effectiveness as a team. Then they waited, continuing their circuit while uncertainty hung over them. The response came 3 weeks later, delivered by courier along with the first hints of autumn color in the leaves. Braden's hands shook slightly as he broke the seal and read the official orders. "Request approved," he said, looking up at Grusha with dawning joy. "We are authorized for year-round patrol with enhanced supply provisions for winter operations. They are also assigning us 2 additional way stations as winter shelters and upgrading the existing structures with better insulation and storage." Grusha took the orders and read them herself, as if needing to confirm the reality. They approved it. They are actually allowing us to stay partnered. "There is more," Braden said, scanning the rest of the document. "We are being officially designated as a permanent partnership, one of the first in the program. They want to track long-term outcomes and effectiveness metrics. We would be required to file detailed quarterly reports, but otherwise have significant autonomy in how we conduct our patrol." "This is more than I hoped for," Grusha admitted, and her smile was brighter than Braden had seen in months. "We actually get to stay together, to build something lasting." They celebrated that night, camping in a meadow beneath a canopy of stars and talking late into the night about their plans, where they would establish their winter headquarters, how they would modify patrol routes for snow conditions, what supplies they would need to cache at each way station before the first serious storms. The conversation was practical and logistical, but beneath it ran a current of joy that transformed mundane planning into something precious. As summer faded into autumn, they prepared methodically for winter operations. They stocked way stations with firewood and preserved food. They scouted shelter locations and marked routes that would remain passable in snow. They practiced cold weather survival skills and tested equipment to ensure it could handle severe conditions. They also grew increasingly comfortable with their relationship, the need for secrecy diminishing as they operated primarily alone in the wilderness. Small gestures of affection became routine. A hand on the shoulder in passing, sitting close by the fire, falling asleep with limbs tangled together. The physical intimacy remained cautious, both of them aware that rushing into that aspect of their relationship could complicate things they were not ready to complicate, but the emotional intimacy deepened daily. It was on a crisp autumn morning, with frost crunching under their boots and their breath misting in the cold air, that they encountered another patrol team. A mixed partnership they had helped train at the garrison. The human ranger, a woman named Sarah, and her orc partner, a male named Ragnar, greeted them with genuine warmth. "We were hoping to run into you," Sarah said as they shared a mid-morning meal at the crossing of their territories. "We wanted to say thank you. The training you provided made all the difference for us." "You are doing well, then?" Braden asked. "Better than well," Ragnar answered, his deep voice rumbling with satisfaction. "We have been partnered for 5 months now, and it feels natural. We trust each other. We communicate effectively. We are friends." The pride in his voice was unmistakable, and Braden saw Grusha's expression soften with pleasure at the confirmation that their work had yielded real results. They spent an hour trading stories and information about their respective territories before the other patrol team continued south and Braden and Grusha resumed their northern route. "That felt good," Grusha said as they walked. "Seeing them succeed, knowing we helped make that possible." "It did," Braden agreed. "Maybe we were wrong to worry so much about the larger implications. Maybe just doing good work and building relationships is enough." "Maybe," Grusha allowed. "Or maybe we were right to be cautious and we are simply reaching a point where the caution is less necessary. The world is changing, slowly. What seemed impossible 2 years ago is becoming accepted. What was forbidden is becoming merely unusual." The first snow fell in late October, earlier than expected but not dangerously so. They were well prepared, holed up in one of their reinforced way stations with supplies sufficient for weeks if necessary. The snow transformed the landscape into something alien and beautiful, muffling sound and covering the familiar terrain in white. For 3 days, they stayed inside while the storm raged, using the forced confinement to organize their documentation and plan their winter routes. But mostly they simply existed together in the small space, talking and reading and occasionally falling into comfortable silence that required no words. On the 4th day, the storm broke, revealing a world remade in snow. They ventured out on snowshoes, moving slowly through drifts that reached their knees in places, checking the surrounding area for damage and signs of wildlife. The cold was brutal but manageable with proper gear, and Braden found himself exhilarated by the challenge. "This is what we signed up for," Grusha said, her words creating clouds of steam in the frigid air. "Winter on the frontier. Most people would call us insane." "Most people do not understand what we have," Braden replied. "This is ours, the wilderness, the challenge each other. I would not trade it for any comfort." Grusha stopped walking and turned to face him, her expression serious beneath the fur-lined hood of her winter cloak. "Braden, I need to say something, and I am going to say it plainly because circling around it feels dishonest." Braden's heart began pounding, though he could not say if it was from anticipation or anxiety. "What is it?" "I love you," Grusha said simply. "I have loved you for months now, probably since that day in the meadow when we first confessed our feelings. But I have been afraid to say the words, afraid they would make everything more complicated or create expectations we could not meet. But standing here, in this place we have claimed as ours, refusing to hide anymore, I need you to know. I love you completely. I want a life with you, whatever that looks like." The words hit Braden with the force of physical impact, knocking the breath from his lungs. He closed the distance between them in 2 quick strides, pulling her close despite the bulky winter clothing. "I love you too," he said fiercely. "I have been afraid to say it for the same reasons, but it has been true for so long. You are the best thing in my life, Grusha. The thing I am most grateful for. I love you, and I want to build our future together." They kissed there in the snow, the cold forgotten in the warmth of shared emotion. When they finally pulled apart, both were grinning like fools. "Well," Grusha said, still smiling, "that was overdue." "Dramatically so," Braden agreed. "We should probably work on our communication timing." "We have all winter to practice," Grusha pointed out, "and spring, and summer, and every season after that if you want." "I want," Braden said with absolute certainty. "All the seasons with you, whatever comes." They returned to the way station and spent the evening in a state of giddy contentment, the weight of unspoken feelings finally lifted. They made plans both practical and fantastical. Where they might eventually build a permanent home, how they would balance patrol duties with private life, whether they wanted to start a family someday or remain just the two of them. "My clan believed in choosing your family," Grusha said as they lay together in the single bunk they now shared without hesitation. "That blood mattered less than commitment and love. I lost one family. I thought I would never have another. But with you, I feel like I am building something new. A family of 2. Maybe not just 2 forever," Braden said thoughtfully. "If we stay on the frontier, if we build a permanent home here, there could be others. Humans and orcs who need a place to belong, who want to live outside the rigid divisions of clan and kingdom. We could create something entirely new. A border community," Grusha said, warming to the idea, "where the old prejudices do not apply, where people are judged by their character instead of their species. That would be something worth building." "Then let us build it," Braden said. "Not immediately, but over time. As we prove that cooperation works, That trust is possible, that love does not recognize the boundaries others try to impose. Winter deepened around them, testing their skills and endurance with harsh weather and difficult conditions. But they thrived in the challenge, their partnership seamless and their spirits high. They maintained their patrol routes as best they could, checking in with the few winter settlements in their territory and documenting the quiet season when most threats retreated to wait for spring. It was during one of these check-ins, at a remote homestead occupied by a family of human trappers, that they received unexpected news. The father, a weather-beaten man named Henry, greeted them with unusual excitement. "You two are famous," he declared, ushering them into the warm cabin. Word came through from the settlement south. "Command is using your partnership as proof that the mixed patrol initiative works. They are expanding it across the entire frontier, dozens of new partnerships being formed." Braden and Grusha exchanged glances, both pleased and slightly uncomfortable with the attention. "We are just doing our jobs," Braden said. "You are doing more than that," Henry's wife Margaret insisted. "You are showing people a different way forward. My children are growing up seeing humans and orcs work together, trust each other. That will change how they view the world. That matters." Their young daughter, perhaps 8 years old, approached Grusha shyly. "Are you really an orc?" "I am," Grusha said gently. "You do not look scary." "You look nice." Grusha's smile was small but genuine. "I try to be nice. Being scary would not help me do my job very well." The little girl considered this seriously, then nodded and returned to her play. Margaret watched with satisfaction. "That is what I mean. A generation ago, my daughter would have been taught to fear orcs on sight. Now she meets one and sees a person doing helpful work. You are changing the world, whether you intended to or not." As they left the homestead and continued their patrol, Braden mulled over Margaret's words. "Do you think she is right, that we are changing things?" "I think we are part of a change that is happening regardless of our individual contribution," Grusha said thoughtfully. "The frontier is too large and too dangerous for humans and orcs to keep fighting each other. Cooperation is simply practical. We are demonstrating what that cooperation can look like, but the need for it exists independently of us. So we are symbols as much as rangers. We are rangers who happen to be symbolic," Grusha corrected. "There is a difference. Our primary job is still border security. The larger meaning comes secondary to that." Spring arrived gradually, the snow melting in fits and starts as the temperature fluctuated wildly. Their territory transformed from white silence to muddy chaos to, finally, the green explosion of new growth. They had survived the winter, their partnership strengthened by the shared challenge. And as they completed their first full year cycle, Braden felt profound satisfaction in what they had built. The official evaluation came with the spring thaw, delivered by Commander Harris himself, who had made the journey north specifically to meet with them. They gathered in the primary way station, and Harris reviewed their documentation with obvious approval. "Exceptional work," he declared. "Your winter operations data is invaluable. Command is using it to develop protocols for other year-round assignments. You have proven that sustained patrol presence is both feasible and beneficial." "Thank you, sir," Braden said. "We are committed to continuing this work." Harris nodded, then his expression grew more serious. "I need to address something that has been brought to my attention through various channels. There are rumors about the nature of your partnership, suggestions that it goes beyond professional collaboration." Braden felt his stomach drop, but before he could formulate a response, Grusha spoke up calmly. "The rumors are correct, sir. Braden and I are in a romantic relationship. We have been for nearly a year. It has not impaired our professional judgment or effectiveness." If anything, the trust and understanding we share has made us more effective partners. Harris was quiet for a long moment, studying them both. Braden held his breath, bracing for censure or reassignment. Finally, the commander sighed. "I suspected as much," he admitted. "The way you work together, the coordination you display, the complete trust you demonstrate. It suggested a bond that went beyond typical partnerships." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "Officially, I should probably express concern about professional boundaries and potential conflicts of interest. Unofficially, I am not sure it matters. Your results speak for themselves. You are the most effective patrol team we have ever fielded. You have trained others successfully. You have resolved conflicts and saved lives. If your personal relationship is part of why you function so well together, then perhaps command should be grateful for it rather than concerned." "Are you saying you are not going to separate us?" Braden asked, hardly daring to hope. "I am saying that I have no intention of interfering with something that is clearly working," Harris clarified. "There will be oversight, of course. Regular evaluations to ensure that your personal relationship does not compromise your professional judgment. But unless something changes dramatically, I see no reason to disrupt your partnership." Relief washed through Braden so intensely he felt lightheaded. Beside him, Grusha had gone very still, and he could see her fighting to control her reaction. "We appreciate your trust, sir," Grusha said quietly. "Do not make me regret it," Harris replied, but his tone was not unkind. "Continue doing the excellent work you have been doing. Document everything, and be prepared for the fact that your relationship will be scrutinized. You are blazing a trail here. That comes with both opportunity and burden." After Harris departed, Braden and Grusha stood together in the way station, processing what had just happened. "Did that really just occur?" Braden asked. "Did command just essentially approve our relationship?" "They approved our continued partnership with the understanding that our relationship is part of that equation," Grusha said carefully. "That is not quite the same as approval, but it is far more than I expected. We have been given permission to continue being ourselves, at least in this context." "Then we accept that gift and keep doing what we do best," Braden said, pulling her close. "We patrol the border, we help people, we build a life together, and we let the future take care of itself." Summer arrived in full force, and with it came increased activity along the border. They encountered smugglers and traders, hunting parties and explorers, settlers looking for land and refugees fleeing conflict. Each encounter was an opportunity to demonstrate that cooperation between species was not only possible but beneficial. They mediated disputes, provided assistance, and gathered intelligence that helped command understand the evolving situation along the frontier. It was during a routine patrol in late summer that they discovered something unexpected. A small group of people, both human and orc, building a permanent settlement in a sheltered valley that straddled the border between territories. The structures were crude but functional, and the inhabitants greeted Braden and Grusha with a mixture of hope and defiance. "We know this is irregular," the leader, a human woman named Alina, said as she showed them around. "We are not claiming this land for any kingdom or clan. We are building a community where anyone is welcome, regardless of species or origin, a place where the old divisions do not matter." Braden exchanged glances with Grusha, remembering their winter conversation about exactly this kind of possibility. "How many people live here?" he asked. 15 currently. 6 human families, 4 orc families, and some individuals who do not fit neatly into either category. We farm, hunt, trade with both human and orc settlements. We want to prove that peaceful coexistence is possible. This is technically a violation of border regulations," Grusha said, though her tone suggested she was thinking through the implications rather than issuing a condemnation. Neither side has authorized settlement in this area. We know, Alina acknowledged, but we are also not hurting anyone. We police ourselves, we resolve our own disputes, and we ask nothing from either kingdom or clan except to be left alone. We were hoping that you, as a successful mixed partnership, might understand what we are trying to achieve. Braden looked at the settlement, seeing the carefully tended gardens, the children of both species playing together, the shared communal spaces that suggested genuine integration rather than forced tolerance. This was the vision he and Grusha had discussed, already taking root. "We will need to report this to command," he said slowly. "But we will also advocate for allowing you to continue. You are demonstrating exactly what the Border Patrol Initiative is meant to foster: cooperation and mutual benefit. Shutting you down would contradict our entire mission." "Will command listen?" Alina asked. "They listened when we requested year-round patrol," Grusha said. "They listened when we advocated for expanded mixed partnerships. They might listen to this as well, especially if we present it as an experiment worth monitoring rather than a problem to solve." They spent the rest of the day documenting the settlement in detail, interviewing residents, and assessing the practical aspects of their arrangement. That evening, they composed a careful report that emphasized the settlement's potential as a model for future border communities, while acknowledging the regulatory complications. The response from command took weeks to arrive, and when it did, it was characteristically bureaucratic. The settlement would be allowed to continue on a provisional basis, subject to regular inspections and oversight by Border Patrol. Violations of major laws would result in immediate dissolution, but otherwise, the community would be permitted to develop organically as a test case for integrated settlement. When Braden and Grusha delivered the news to Alina, the relief and joy were palpable. The settlement celebrated that night with a feast that brought everyone together, human and orc sharing food and stories around a central fire. Braden and Grusha were guests of honor, toasted repeatedly for their advocacy. "You gave us a chance," Alina said, raising her cup in salute. "That is all we asked for, a chance to prove this can work." "Just make sure you succeed," Braden replied with a smile, "because if you fail, it will be harder for others to try." "We will succeed," Alina said with fierce determination. "We have too much invested to fail." As autumn approached again, marking the second full year of their partnership, Braden and Grusha found themselves reflecting on how much had changed. What had begun as an awkward pairing neither particularly wanted had transformed into something neither could imagine living without. They had proven that cooperation was possible. They had trained others to follow their example. They had advocated for change and seen it slowly take root. And they had fallen in love so completely that the very idea of separation felt impossible. It was on a cool autumn evening, camping in the same meadow where they had first confessed their feelings, that Braden pulled a small carved wooden box from his pack. His hands shook slightly as he opened it to reveal two simple rings, wrought from silver and etched with intertwining patterns that suggested both human and orcish artistic traditions. "I had these made during our last resupply run," he said, his voice steady despite his nervousness. "I know we cannot have a traditional human wedding or a traditional orc bonding ceremony. We exist between worlds, creating something new, but I wanted to give you something tangible that represents my commitment. Grusha, will you marry me? Or bond with me? Or whatever term we want to use for promising to spend our lives together." Grusha stared at the rings, her eyes bright with unshed tears. When she looked up at him, her expression was fierce with emotion. "Yes, to all of it. Marriage, bonding, partnership, whatever words we need. Yes, I will spend my life with you. Braden slipped one ring onto her finger, and she took the other to place on his, their hands joining in a clasp that felt both ancient and entirely new. They held each other in the fading light, two people who had found each other against impossible odds and built something worth protecting. "We should probably figure out how to make this official," Grusha said practically, even as she wiped tears from her face. "For legal purposes, if nothing else." "We will figure it out," Braden assured her. "We have gotten good at navigating complications. This is just one more." In truth, making their union official proved easier than expected. The settlement they had helped protect, River's Bend, had a magistrate willing to perform a marriage ceremony that honored both human and orc traditions. The community turned out to celebrate, the same people whose lives they had saved now witnessing their commitment to each other. Commander Harris attended, along with several of the partnerships they had trained, and if the gathering was unusual by any traditional standard, it was also joyful in a way that transcended species and custom. When the magistrate declared them bound to each other in all ways that mattered, the cheers were genuine and enthusiastic. "You two continue to surprise me," Harris said during the celebration feast afterward. "In the best possible ways. Command is watching your example closely. This marriage will be documented as further evidence that integration is not only possible but beneficial." "We are not symbols," Grusha said, but without heat. "We are just two people trying to live honestly." "You are both," Harris replied, "and that is exactly why you matter." They spent their wedding night in a room at River's Bend's modest inn, and for the first time, they had complete privacy and the freedom to simply be together, without the concerns of patrol or presentation. What passed between them was tender and profound, a physical expression of the emotional bond they had spent 2 years forging. In the morning, they returned to their patrol, but now as acknowledged partners in every sense. They continued their circuit through autumn and into their second winter, the rhythm of seasons marking the passage of time in a life that felt increasingly settled despite its itinerant nature. The settlement in the border valley flourished, drawing more residents who wanted to live outside traditional divisions. Other similar communities began appearing in remote areas, inspired by the precedent that had been set. The mixed patrol partnerships expanded until they were no longer unusual but simply part of how the frontier was secured. And through it all, Braden and Grusha walked their territory together. The original partnership that had proven cooperation was possible. They faced challenges and celebrated victories. They trained new rangers and advocated for change. They built a life that honored both their heritages while creating something entirely new. When spring arrived for the third time since they had first been partnered, bringing with it the wild profusion of flowers that had become symbolic of their relationship, they stood together on a ridge overlooking their territory and reflected on how far they had come. "You ever regret it?" Braden asked. Accepting that first assignment, being paired with an unknown human partner, Grusha considered the question seriously before answering. "I regretted it initially. I thought it was Command's way of punishing me or using me for political purposes. But now, no. I would not change anything. You gave me back something I thought I had lost forever when my clan died, a sense of belonging, of purpose, of home. You are my home now, Braden." "And you are mine," Braden replied, taking her hand. "Everything else is just geography." They stood there as the sun climbed higher, warming the land after winter's cold grip, and watched their territory come back to life. Below them, a rider approached from the south, likely carrying new orders or updates from Command. Soon they would descend and receive whatever news the frontier brought, then continue their patrol as they had done for years now. But for this moment, they simply existed together in the place they had claimed as theirs, two people who had been brought together by assignment and stayed together by choice. The border stretched endlessly in both directions, dividing kingdoms and clans, but where they stood there was no division, only partnership, only love, only the future they were building, one patrol at a time. The rider reached them, and they received their new orders with the calm professionalism that had become their hallmark. Another season, another circuit, another opportunity to demonstrate that the impossible was simply what people called things they had not yet achieved. They had achieved it. They had proven that human and orc could work together, trust together, love together, build a life together. And as they set out on their next patrol, walking side by side through the wilderness that had become their home, Braden knew with absolute certainty that he would spend the rest of his life walking beside Grusha, partners in every way that mattered, refusing any assignment that would separate them. Because they had found something rare and precious and worth protecting above all else: each other.